Konnichiwa, minasan. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ben Redder. I am from New Zealand. I am a historian specializing in the representation of history through video games. And I'm also a postdoctoral research fellow based here at Ritsumeikan University. And I've already met a small handful of you already, probably from class or just through PhD, meeting up with some of the PhD students. So looking forward to today. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I also look forward to any feedback or questions you might have after the discussion. So today's presentation is on Tales of Japan, intersections of Japanese history and culture through historical video games. Once I get, oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. So for today's presentation, this will consist of three parts. Firstly, just to introduce the topic of my research focus, Rekishi Monogatari games, which are a particular group of Japanese historical games. Secondly, just to broadly outline some of the main contributions or potential contributions that that my research on Rekishi Monogatari games will situate, particularly around historical fiction with respect to Japanese historical gaming. And finally, just to talk about the current outline of the project's research framework. I just want to clarify that while I'm currently in the research stage already, this discussion will situate around what my primary topic intends to explore, what I aim to find in my data collection, and what are the methods that I intend to use, so to speak. But I do have some sample of some of the screenshots from my own game footage recording of a particular game, which I'll show in the course of this presentation. But before I go into those 3 points, I just want to summarize just the discipline that I'm a part of, which is historical game studies. This discipline concerns with the study of games that represents the past or relate to discourses about it. And this entails a whole myriad of practices and approaches, which I wish I had more time to discuss, but these things range from receptions of historical periods in games, from medieval Europe to ancient Greece and Rome, the culture media approaches, such as metagaming, memory studies, and also particularly the formalist approaches to historical game studies. So most popular among them being the simulacrum approach. But generally, what a lot of the approaches in historical game studies engage with is the examinations of the formal structures, affordances, and limitations of the historical game form. And this form that I speak of are like the ludic or procedural properties of different video game systems that not only enables the constructions of historical representations to appear, but also how these various mechanisms of the game system in tandem with the narrative structures and the audiovisual outputs can produce and afford the types of narratives and representations that players receive, as well as perhaps in other ways modeling or simulating theoretical ideas or concepts of history as a process. And just a little bit of my own background, I engage in the study of historical gameplay. So this is influenced by multimodal game discourse theory, so basically historical gameplay are multimodal representations of the past in the form of animative and spatially diverse experiences in a particular mode or style. So gameplay's experientiality is defined by its multimodal composition, entailing various communicative modes within a video game. So the ludic, the visual, the oral, the performative, and other communicative modes, of course, that are historicized through historical sources or modes of historical fiction. And this kind of reflects on my arguments of the study that historical gameplay is the medium of historical game representation rather than the game, which I argue to be the object of the game, game being the object containing opportunities for engagement. I approach differently from historical game studies, so not looking at historical games as solely formula systems, but as multimodal texts, and therefore adopts what I call a games as history approach. So how history informs and interplays with the procedural constituents of the game world and the various mechanics through examining the experientiality of the player's gameplay activity from the beginning of the game right through to the end. But now we'll get on to the main course of this presentation. So the first part, I want to just sort of introduce just sort of my interest, which is looking at, so my interest in researching Japanese history games is looking at the wide range of what I deem multimodal compositions of representing the past through fictionalization, which I argue to be the dominant form of representation within Japanese history games, which has over the many years disseminated Japanese history not only through a wide range of historical periods, but also across many kinds of platforms. So mobile games, PC, computer, laptops, streaming services as well, just to name a few. And so what we find here is that fictionalized Japanese history within gaming ranges from something like Okami, which I don't know if you've played the game, but combines the ukiyo-e woodblock print and the sumie ink brush styles in sort of, I guess, a recasting of Japanese mythology inspired by the classic texts, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. I'm also, by extension, interested in the particularities and the distinctions between different historical game design practices within, particularly within Japan. So ranging from Koei Studios, the glitter and glamour approach of their representation of particularly medieval Japanese history, to the more dark, gritty survival horror aspects that we might see in Onimusha, in the Onimusha series. But where does my sort of research situate in this wide, wide study of Japanese historical games? So I thought the best way would be to kind of maybe start what I class to be the beginning or the inception of Japanese historical games and historical game culture, starting with what I term Rekishi mono games. Why have I called it Rekishi mono games? Well, I argue that these games are not simplistic, but we're simply taking cultural reference or cultural or historical reference from a Japanese history and use it as a way of thematizing the game system. So this is the sort of retro, the arcade era, going back to the 1980s. So the coin-operated arcade machines, for example, that were very, very popular. Very interestingly, this is very much a big, large corpus of games that, as I've said, take certain Japanese historical concepts. Just to give an example, Kiki Kakai, the image on the top left-hand screen, this is essentially playing as a Shinto priestess who is rescuing the 7 lucky gods. There's a yokai that have snatched them away, and she travels through different levels, battling yokai with using her purifying rod and Ofuda scrolls, sort of like a range weapon, shooting magic to kill the yokai. Or take for another example, the game Iki, which is inspired by sort of the peasant revolts of medieval Japan, particularly in the Sengoku era. So essentially what it is you're starting a revolt against the feudal lord, and to win the game, however, you just fight the feudal lord's ninja, collecting gold coins, or essentially finding the feudal lord to clear the level or the mission. So very simple, nice and easy. And again, as I said, to essentially thematize the game system. But some of the earliest games, like Genpei Tomoden, are what I would deem to be sort of progenitors for a later brand of historical games. In producing what I would class as a sort of another wave of historical games. So I don't know if you can see up the top, I put up Rekishi mono games. as sort of an early progenitor. And essentially what this framework is designed to sort of address the different languages or the different modes of historical representation with respect to Japanese history games. So of the three, as I said, the most popular one, what I call the fictionalized history. This is the one that is the most commonly popular form for game studios, whether based in the West or more so in Japan. You'll notice that there are three genres. One is the Jidaigeki. These are games that represent Japanese history through a propensity of using modern media. So things like maybe the classic cinematic forms back in like the 1970s or the 1980s, just to give Akira Kurosawa's films an example, the Zatoichi series, as you might see with the game Way of the Samurai. So that ranges from the cinematic forms to a more sort of recent contemporary anime manga styles, even the otome, bishoujo, and the shoujo genres of historical dating games, which are also part of what I deem to be Jidaigeki. So this is, again, a very wide corpus of games, but sharing the conventions of the period drama, whether in the dating genre, in the cinematic genre, maybe of course, the anime and manga as other popular styles. Not to mention, of course, that these games generally situate a historical period or setting, but the main focus is on the fidelity of the conventions of that respective period drama. So, yeah. Secondly, we have the Senryaku games, which are what I deem to be the strategy games. So, for example, Shogun Total War and Nobunaga's Ambition. And finally, we also have another category, what I deem to call Rekishi Monogatari games, or historical game tales. You might notice there are two other categories. One, Pararekishi. So these are games that take place in parallel worlds, alternate histories. They often reverse or subvert the rules or the conventions governing history, but they still, to varying degrees, allegorically represent Japanese history and culture. And I also have up there Kiroku Jitsuroku games. They're blank because, to my knowledge, they don't exist yet. These are the kind of games that are scholarly driven, heavily incorporating extensive research and evidence. So essentially game studios adopting a lot of games will incorporate certain aspects from one mode in the other. So all of these games, they will have like a dominant mode of historical representation supported by other modes. So Rekishi Monogatari games, some of them might have some elements of Jidaigeki as secondary supporting modes. Same, of course, for fictionalized history games incorporating some aspects of Kiroku or Jitsuroku. So my work is on Rekishi Monogatari games. This is where my research is mainly based under, which are a relatively understudied group of Japanese history games that retells or reimagines Japan's past as multimodal variations of historical tales. So in practice, this process entails remediations of the monogatari form of historical fiction. So that is the representational conventions, the content, aesthetics, and the cultural themes and archetypes from Japan's pre-modern traditions of historical representation and narrative storytelling. So examples of these kind of sources are the Gunki Monogatari, war, martial tales, otogizoshi, short stories, folklore and oral traditions such as the yokai, kaidan, art forms, ukiyo-e, performative dramas, And also, I extend this to even the realm of 19th century works, such as the Yomihon and Kabuki from the Edo period. Now, of course, these games still generally adhere to the visual, the narrative, and the material authenticities of the game's respective history, but the primary value of these kind of remediations is a dissemination of gameplay experiences that playfully reimagine, re-examine, or challenge both past and contemporary retellings, receptions, and recognitions of Japan's past. So popular I guess, game systems that Rekishi Monogatari games are commonly found in are the action-adventure games and survival horror. But I'm sure that maybe some other types of game systems, maybe the RPG genre, that might also extend this kind of representation. I also like to say that these games' process of remediating Japanese history through monogatari modes of expression appear to demonstrate to a certain degree Mikhail Zamuda's concept of historicizing remediation that addresses media as historical facts, a category that encompasses media from the past used by historical discourse as credible evidence of past events, while providing a context for the game mechanics, such as archival photographs, letters, navigation devices, and maps. So effectively, this concept addresses not only the content carried by remediated objects, but also the ways in which the media themselves are messages of the past. For my research, these are the case studies that I will be intending to examine. This is something that I've developed and chosen since last year. I may not have time to go through all of them, but these were the case studies that I wanted to explore for my project. You can see one is Neo, the Warrior Tale. This is a reimagination of the last years of the Sengoku period between Tokugawa Ieyasu and Mitsunari Ashida. But it's also retelling of a certain figure who is at the right front of the image, William Adams, his life, his early years in Japan. But it's reimagined as a dark historical fantasy tale where Adams is transformed from a diplomat and a privateer shipwrecked in Japan to being a samurai warrior, following the likes and traditions of legends and folk tales representing the likes of Minamoto no Raiko, Minamoto Yoshitsune, and also Jihaira, the sort of rogue ninja samurai figure. We have Kessen, which is another game that also retells Sengoku history, but does so in what I deem to be that sort of glitter glamour approach, but having two modes of expression, one of a classic retelling of the Sekigahara campaign and the events that took place after that battle, and also a counterfactual mode where you get to play on the side of Toyotomi's forces, including Mitsunari Ashida, an opportunity to sort of retell what if Mitsunari Ashida won the battle of Sekigahara, defeated the Tokugawa forces, what then would you do? And lastly, I've also I like to examine the game series Siren as for a number of reasons, partly because I feel it's an example of how certain games can incorporate different modes of fictionalization. So this game to me appears to exhibit a combination of the monogatari style and the jidaigeki through the intermediary of kaiki eiga films. And I see this particularly in the way that it incorporates a lot of materiality from 1970s Japanese material culture, also to an extent the 2000s, but also the materiality of old Edo period style horror stories and the kaiki eiga film genre as well. As part of my analysis, the thing that is carrying through me when analyzing my games is, are they historical video games? Are these kinds of games histories, formal systems, or game media products? So for me, this kind of constitutes sort of three layers that are part throughout my whole gameplay analysis: the representational, the procedural, and the orientational layers. So just to use Neo as an example, This game entails, as I said, not only as part of the reimagination of Sengoku history, you as Adams as the sort of warrior protagonist not only fight mortal enemies and real life historical figures, but also the myriad of yokai that are in the game. And this is an example of how I see exhibiting sort of representations of monogatari culture and monogatari storytelling. So for example, down on the bottom screen, this is a fight scene that I had with a yokai called the Nue. And the Nue is kind of like a chimera creature. Essentially, this Nue, I feel the game developers reconstructed it not only from past art illustrations, such as this ukiyo-e print from the 19th century, and Toriyama Sekien's drawing of the Nue, but also it goes back to the tale of Heke, which gives a description of the Nue as having the head of a monkey, the limbs of a tiger, the body of a Japanese tanuki or raccoon dog, and the front half of a snake for a tail. So we see this being a clear reconstructive example of a monogatari referent being used in the game, but it's also framed in this context as a thunder elemental beast with the ability to sprout poison from its tail because of the snake. In another similar example, I also fought another large yokai known as Ogama or giant toads, and this Ogama is a depiction of Hattori Masanari, Hatto Hanzo II, who in this game comes back from death, revived as a yokai giant toad. Now, this might be whimsical, but this is actually based on the kabuki presentations of ninja transformations into toads. So this was a very common trope or archetype in a lot of theater, where ninjas, being sort of mystical or having magical abilities, would transform into toads. So it combines this kabuki style of ninja transformation, the yokai Ogama toad, with a figure from Sengoku history. But it's also, I have to also acknowledge that as a monogatari game, it's still part of the wider genre of action-based combat systems. So as part of my experience so far in the game, as incentivizing myself to become a more powerful monogatari warrior protagonist, I would have to get experience points, constantly fight yokai and enemies to accumulate those, as I said, experience points, and use them to add to my skill stats to become a more powerful monogatari warrior. So this pertains to my love for fighting difficult monsters. I love level farming, and so I would get a lot of experience points to improve my character. And also, these are just some of the aspects of the wider Dark Souls feature series. So Neo is seen by many players as a historical variation of the wider Souls series genre. And it's also part of the wider media culture. So looking at the way Neo situates as a form of cultural discourse within sort of topics or debates or discussions, whether it's about historical games. So Neo has often been compared with the recent Assassin's Creed, Shadows of the Ninja. Players have also perceived William Adams to look like Geralt of Rivia, so perhaps Japan's very own answer to a sort of a Witcher sort of figure. Although having said that, the silver hair is also a very common trope in a lot of Japanese games, both in history and non-historical contexts. Final Fantasy is one example, the character Sephiroth. And it's also perhaps in a way a sort of a language maybe expressing of players' interest in some of their popular sort of actors or voice actors. So just to give an example, sorry, this actor on the left-hand screen is the actor Masachika Ichimura, who's played Tokugawa in several adaptations. So the fact that these games are incorporating aspects from our real world or media culture in this game as well. So these are the aims, and just in introducing to you just a sample of Lekishi Monogatari games. The aims of my research project are to identify, examine, and provide conceptual frameworks for understanding some of the understudied typologies and representational nuances of fictionalized Japanese history games through investigating Lekishi Monogatari games as one of its main branches or bodies. To identify and illustrate how Monogatari games present Japanese history by identifying and analyzing some of its gameplay functions or modes of engagement. And this aspect extends to uncovering some of the types of potential scholarship dissemination Monogatari games can contribute to current Japanese history games, game media studies, and of course, my discipline, historical game studies. And by extension, to examine and assess the intentionalities between myself as a player historian and the game developers in their conception or assessment of Lekishi Monogatari games as a history or cultural media product. I do want to acknowledge that Japanese history games has received a growing base of scholarship, primarily in cultural media studies and digital game humanities. It is something that I will acknowledge is still a very limited area in historical game studies. Our research on history games and by extension the area of fictionalization is still confined to mostly medieval Europe, histories based in Europe and North America. So I feel that this is an opportunity for me to bridge my discipline with other forms of other interdisciplinary engagements. But these three at the top are some of the main sources of scholarship that do have some really relevant connection to my own research. Just to give one example, the veneration or the problematization of Japan's nationalist discourses of history. This is a really interesting, or one of the most viable areas to talk about how certain Japanese historical games emblematize historical figures, events, and themes to reinforce or at times problematize Japan's nationalist discourses by styling these constituents under the aesthetic and sociocultural practices of commonly pop cultural media, illustrative of Japan's collective cultural identity. With my contributions, what I hope to do with my study of Lekishi Monogatari games is to provide a extensive historical contribution to looking and distinguishing the different kinds of fictionalization that appear within Japanese historical gaming. Just from my research that I've been analyzing, I would say that a relative majority of Japanese historical game research has largely been focused on the Jidaigeki genre. And I would say within that sphere, I would also argue that the anime, manga, otome genres are the ones that gets a lot of attention, which I completely understand, of course. It's a very popular area within Japanese scholarship. So examples being the Sengoku Basara series and Toku Ranben Warriors being just some of the two main examples. Again, this is a very viable area of research, but I feel that this tends to, this sort of prevalent focus does seem to, in ways, loop other kinds of games into that period drama fold, which I would say, whereas I would say they are working on sort of a different approach to fictionalizing Japanese history. So I feel that they have conventions, reference, and ways of representation that are different to the Jidaigeki form. I would also like to highlight that there is also potential for Lekishi Monogatari games to contribute around the linkages of scholarship on historical fantasy and cultural history, to some degree counterfactual history as well, but mainly cultural history and historical fantasy by linking the sort of vivid and the subtle fantasy elements that are authentically representative or characteristic to past fantastical constructions within the monogatari sphere, with experiences that access and fuse both past and contemporary effects, sensibilities, mentalities, and cultural memories or responses to Japan's past. So I would say that Rekishi Monogatari games, I hope to find, tap in more to pre-modern Japanese traditions of history with contemporary remediations of that same history. But also in other ways, producing new kinds of monogatari expression through that process. This methodology consists primarily of my self-authored gameplay footage. This is going to be my primary evidence, supported by the written literature, which entails scholarship in historical game studies, cultural studies, digital game humanities, also the monogatari literature, the studies on that as well, and also by extension studying Japanese historical games in that sphere. The attempt of using a variety of methods is to, I see the value in comparing gameplay footage with written scholarship, also to an extent material fieldwork as well. But the two main approaches are, of course, my self-authored gameplay. This is just to sort of emphasize that this is one of the criticisms I have with historical game studies, where we talk a lot about historical games. We analyze concepts or ideas or representations, but very rarely do we actually use gameplay textual evidence in demonstrating our points or talking about representations. Much of our scholarship is still monographs, are still in a monomodal format. And I feel that this is an opportunity to, also for myself, to incorporate the practices of vivid gameplay evidence as historical evidence. The interviews, just to summarize, the key reason that I want to use these methods is to find out about the aims and roles of Japanese game developers behind my chosen case studies and their research and development of fictionalized forms of historical representation. So this includes looking or finding out as to some of the methods and the sources from historical research, game design, and media language that they used for developing the Rekishi Monogatari game case studies as a novel gameplay recreation of fictionalized Japanese history. And also to inquire into how the historical game might share, or perhaps if they might have discerned or found any comparisons or relationships to past Japanese traditions of historical representation. I'll just because we are limited with time, this was just my literature review. But for my gameplay analysis, this is my framework that I developed for my PhD study that I'll be using to analyze my gameplay evidence. So this will be, this framework is based on a key principle or concept around multimodality, which recognizes how different languages or modalities of representation communicate different experiences of histories within a game's multimodal composition. So all of which contained in and represented as historical gameplay. So game footage, as being one of the primary bodies of evidence, is suitable then to expand research on Japanese history games. Japanese history games by providing a more viable method to examine the myriad of the multimodal ensembles that take place within the gameplay activity. And different kinds of gameplay representations, some of which might exhibit the lore history modality, some of which exhibit fictionalized history, which is my main focus for the project, and also in parahistory. And when undertaking historical modality analysis, there are three key layers that I use when analyzing gameplay footage. Again, the representational aspect. So the multimodal composition and the communication of gameplay sequences as animated and scholarly-based or reimagined representations of history. The second layer, the procedural function, to identify and describe the fundamental game mechanics and conventions inherent within gameplay. This is to acknowledge, of course, that representations, historical representations specifically, are still partially organized and codified by the game design conventions, the rules, and the player affordances common to the video game form. And lastly, the orientational function, which, just to give a very broad summary, is gameplay as feedback loop or correspondence with player or viewer impressions of history within the intersections between historical games as popular media entertainment or as multimodal representations of the past. So a common example is the way games might employ strategies or invoking tropes, signs, motives, archetypes, which resonate to a player or viewer's impressions or recognitions of that history, circulated from current attitudes in mainstream society, media entertainment, or online discourse as well. And again, I won't have enough time, but I can show this in the Q&A. This is just a framework of my historical gameplay modality. And lastly, just to sort of conclude the presentation, I want to acknowledge that my work, research, situates within a type of multimodal history, which is gameplay as history. But I recognize that what I do, or what the research that I'll be doing, and the practice of gameplay as history is just one of many outputs. Because I believe gameplay to be a multimodal form of communication, history is just one of many, many outputs. It exists within the wider corpus of cultural media discourse. It's also part of online forms of online expression. It's often a source for meme culture. It's used by content creators or Twitch streamers to tell their story or to give commentary. And I just want to acknowledge that gameplay has a myriad of purposes. Gameplay history, gameplay communication has a myriad of roles and purposes, with history just being one example. And this is just to end the presentation of a game developer who, a game reviewer of this game, Kingdom Come Deliverance, who, again, in exhibiting gameplay as communicative media, decided not to review the game on its historical research by Warhorse Studios, or simply looking at how well the game mechanics were, but just simply gave a retelling on him finding his missing boots, a story, a tale of vengeance to reclaim his missing boots that he lost in the game. And that was the whole game review. So again, just to emphasize the innumerable ways that we can approach gameplay representation. So thank you all. And that ends my presentation. Thank you.